Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Chakra Way Meditation Podcast. And today I bring you another lovely guest. So today I'm talking to Dr. Pete Economou, who is a CBT psychologist, sports psychologist. I love that one of your taglines is spreading joy and cultivating daily gratitude, which makes me a happy person because we all need to spread a bit of joy. So let's spread some joy today and welcome Dr. Pete. Thank you for joining me.
I'm so thankful to be here and thank you for having me. And hopefully, some listeners will feel some joy.
Yeah. Oh, why not? Absolutely. Find yourself something joyful to do whilst you're listening to this.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Pete, your CBT, this is a fascinating um, discipline that's been around for a while. Now,
Yeah.
in the UK, if you go to your doctor, your physical, your medical doctor with an issue, they will subscribe a course of CBT. It's one of the few sort of so-called alternative-ish. I mean, it's not really that alternative, it's quite mainstream and accepted now. But it's one of the few of the sort of more alternative things that doctors in this country anyway will prescribe on the NHS. So you get it for free. You get like, I don't know,
Yeah.
6 sessions or something for free. And essentially, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's basically working your way towards mindfulness. Is that correct?
Well, it's not incorrect.
Mm.
In, in that it's there's three waves of CBT, so cognitive and behavioral therapy. The first wave is very behavioral, and so
Mhm.
that was just getting the rat to the race, so mazes where we learned about behaviorism. So the rat would have to find where the cheese was, if you will.
Yeah.
And then the second wave is when people like Beck and Ellis came in and said, oh, but thoughts are also associated with that. And so then there was like thoughts and behavior. And now the third wave is acceptance based, which is the mindfulness stuff. And so
Wow.
practitioners in this third wave, we are helping people cultivate mindfulness as a practice because we've found that it's such a empirically supported intervention.
Mm.
I kind of feel I don't understand how anyone would not be doing it. So I love to hear that in the UK they're prescribing that, 6 sessions, and I think we're moving that way here in the US. There's
Mm.
a lot more like in primary care kind of conversations around mental health and kind of subscribing or prescribing certain kind of mental health interventions or CBT.
Mm. I mean, as far as I'm aware, in the work that I do, which is all sort of yoga, chakras, energetic kind of work, on the borders of woo-woo, but I love to bring in the science to prove the fact that this energetic stuff is really real. For me, it's the work that you do to bring yourself into the present moment. Is that I mean, why don't you just give us a brief overview? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know exactly what CBT and mindfulness is
Yeah.
because out there, but we might not actually have a real, if somebody asked us to define it ourselves, we might not be able to do it. So why don't you just do that for us so we're all on the same page?
Sure. Yeah. And I love that you said that to set it up because the truth is, when I first started doing this about 15 years ago, people did not know it. I
Yeah.
think today they know it a lot more. Everyone's at least heard the word
They
mindfulness.
know of it. Yeah.
They know of it. Whether or not they know what it actually is a different story. But I approach it. So mindfulness is on purpose in the present moment and without judgment. So
Mm.
that's from John Kabat-Zinn, and that's the definition that it's pretty global, but also pretty abstract. So what
Well,
does that actually?
straightforward instructions, really. I mean, that's pretty,
Sure,
the nice and clear. I like that.
they're clear, and if it were that easy to do, we would all do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I always like the how to. So on purpose in the present moment without judgment. So whatever you're doing it with intention so that you're not like mindlessly scrolling. It's not to say you can't be on social media, but if you get stuck in a thing of just scrolling for, 30, 40 minutes, that's not on purpose. You
Mm.
do it in the present moment. So you're always trying to kind of ground yourself with something. And so with your work, you might ground yourself with some kind of nature element or with a breath element, any kind of grounding technique, and then without judgment. And this is the piece that I find to be the most challenging for many people because the brain loves to judge. I mean, that's what keeps us alive. So it's, we're not going to get rid of judgment. But the goal is with intention and in the present moment, if we can live in a more non-judgmental way, we can experience things more fully.
Mm. Yeah. So when as a practitioner, as a qualified doctor who teaches this to people, is it something you teach them or you coach them through? How do you bring that into somebody's life? Because I know that, I can see behind you, you've got your workbook.
Yeah.
Those things are very much in the, I mean, you can go into a bookshop and buy yourself a
Yeah.
mindfulness or a CBT type workbook that you
Sure.
have to sit down and do.
Yeah.
It's like homework almost.
Sure.
Um, so how do people begin to sort of no, I think we should go back to the beginning. What are the benefits? What is it that everybody can benefit from
Yeah.
through CBT and through mindfulness work?
Yeah, and I want to be I want to be clear. Like I think they're they are uh they are not the same thing. So they're very similar and they're like cousins. So maybe they're in the same
Mm,
family tree, but CBT and mindfulness are different.
okay.
I think it's important just to differentiate because
Well, tell me
you know,
what the differentiations are between them.
well, so if I'm practicing cognitive and behavioral therapy from a first or second wave, I may not never introduce mindfulness at all. And so that was what I led with. So the first wave is more behaviorism. So behaviorism is sort of behavioral activation, contingency planning, sort of things that just help people like reward systems, motivation, just to get to where they're going. And then the second, so they may never, within that there's potentially no space for mindfulness. And then the second wave looks at more thoughts, things like David Byrne's cognitive distortions, so all or nothing thinking, generalization, so things that the brain does through these thoughts that kind of impact people's behaviors and feelings. And so the benefits of any of these things, frankly, will vary from person to person, because you
Mm,
will have some listeners that are not into mindfulness. They may have tried it and they don't like it.
mm,
um, Now, your listeners will probably like it a little bit more than others, because if I'm into chakras and if I'm into meditation and Reiki and energy work, I'm probably into mindfulness. But the benefits are tremendous, and so that's why we are an evidence-based practice, because we have a ton of RCTs, randomly controlled trials. So the research kind of supports that what we do works. What do? We reduce symptoms, we improve kind of life engagement, often sort times like decreasing depression and anxiety.
mm,
We are the treatment for anxiety, panic, things around body image.
yeah.
It is sort of the first line of offense for most kind of behavioral or behavioral health issues.
Mm,
Um, then if I go to the mindfulness benefits, it changes the brain. So I'll say that in like a really sort of general way, but there's very little we do that can actually impact the brain in this way. So places like the amygdala. So the amygdala is your emotion regulation center. This can change. The nucleus will shift with the practice of mindfulness. Global, cerebral skeletal, like kind of just gray matter, the density of it increases.
mm,
So these are things that we now have by, bridging the East and the West medicine and intervention to then understand that neurologically the benefits of a mindfulness practice are really tremendous. And I'll say that I think we're just scratching the surface too, because we've been doing heart surgery for over 100 years and we've only been imaging the brain for about 15 to 20.
mm.
And if you've ever had an MRI or seen an MRI machine, they're very similar to early computers. It's a huge room that's required to take a couple pictures of an area of the body.
Yeah.
So I think that we're going to really see some tremendous kind of growth and trajectory in these arenas in the coming time.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that the idea of neuroplasticity has only
Yes.
really just been accepted as a real thing, that we can actually rewire the neurons in our brains.
Yeah.
And this always makes me very, very happy because it just goes to prove what the yogis of thousands of years have been already
Yes.
been saying for ages and forever,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
we can shift the way we think, the way we, and this is the thing I think is like the plague of the West is
Yes.
our minds, is being stuck in our thought patterns and being,
Yeah.
inundated with information that makes us feel not enough or that, we get caught up in, there's such a mental health crisis. And I have this discussion frequently with people who go, well, we were, why is it just recently? Why is it all this mental health stuff coming up
Yeah.
now? Our grandfathers and our, great grandfathers, they were mothers and what have you, they were all absolutely fine. They didn't suffer at all. Well,
Hmm.
you don't know that because they didn't have the vocabulary to even talk about it. So you don't know that they bottled things up and they shoved it away and they didn't, open up.
That's right.
Some would argue that that was a good thing, my mother
Yeah.
included. But, um,
Mine too. Our mothers would get along. Yeah.
um,
I,
but
I want to I want to go back real quick to I think it's really important what you said about the neuroplasticity before we move on from that because um, I'm not, that old, and I, only recently moved out of early career psychology, and I was trained that the brain stops developing after adolescence, so around 22.
mm,
It's wild,
yeah,
that
that's
was something I was
accepted.
taught.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
And
is,
now we know it's not true.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think anybody who has lived a life, who's had got a few decades under their belt, will tell you, I look back at myself 30 years ago. I'm not the same woman that I was then, not by any
Right.
stretch of the imagination. So how
That's
you
right.
can think you can stop developing is just doolally. I just don't understand that. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I read in your bio, which I loved, was, and I want to sort of delve deeper into this, is you say that the brain needs exercise. Now, I
That's
know
right.
that you are a sports psychologist. That's one of your main sort of
Yeah.
things. But exercising the brain. Now, we've all been told that we need to download these apps with the word games and the number games and the do
Yeah.
crosswords and play chess or what have you, play an instrument. Yeah, completely get that. Is that what you're talking about when you talk about exercising the brain?
So thanks for picking that up. And it's like anything else. So yeah, it does. It's the language I use with athletes, but also just with the general population and just high performing individuals. The brain, every one of our organs needs exercise. So we do cardio for our heart. We drink lots of water for kidney. We do an alcohol cleanse for our liver. Like there's things that we do to kind of jumpstart and like help our organs. But I don't think we exercise our brain. And so oftentimes people will say, well, I read, for school. Well, I don't know if that's exercise because it's just sort of it's rote. It's sort of like you don't need to do it on purpose or in the present moment or without judgment. It's just sort of mechanical. And so for me, the exercise is something that's different. So if you drive on the right side, practice on the left in a safe way. But this metaphoric speaking, like so for me, it's like in swimming, as a former swimmer, we circle swim. So you swim up the right and down the left.
Yeah.
Just do it the other way. If like you said, the arts, I might not pick up an instrument, but maybe I can doodle or draw or paint or uh, go hiking. I think you mentioned the apps in the onset. I think the apps are great, obviously. I mean, millions of downloads and have made some people a lot of money. I think it's important to get off the phone though for the practice. Like I don't know that, the phones are brilliant. I'm not anti-phone usage. I'm anti-phone using us.
Yeah.
And that's what ends up happening.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It does. And because it's always there. And the thing that interests me, and I notice this occasionally in myself, I am
Yeah.
guilty of this as the rest, is that, I go to, I don't know, it's the dentist or something, and I'm sat in the waiting room for 20
Yeah.
minutes. Do
Yeah.
I just sit and look at the people around me, or even, God forbid, make conversation with them? Um, or do I take out my phone and just,
Yeah.
scroll aimlessly? I pick up my phone. And as every so often I catch
Yeah.
myself doing that. I go, no, turn it off, put it in my pocket, my bag,
Yeah.
whatever, and just sit and be. And then you look around and you realize that nobody else is doing that. Everybody else is on their phone, unless
Yeah.
they're, 70, 80 plus. And even half of them are on their phones nonstop as
That's
well.
right. Yeah.
You
I
know, it's a real epidemic of this new thing, and it has such
yeah.
power. So I don't know, if it can bring a little bit of mental stimulation, if instead of sitting in the dentist waiting room scrolling through Facebook or whatever, you're actually doing some kind of Sudoku or
Yeah,
crossword or something that's actually making your brain like a little bit active. There's degrees of what's okay-ish, I guess. But
for sure.
yeah, this is something that we need to, and I think having that mantra of on purpose in the present and without judgment,
Yeah,
every time you pick up your phone, that would be an incredibly helpful
absolutely.
thing to
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah.
what's the other thing that you said about, this exercising the brain? And you
Yeah.
talked about everything from exercising or just changing a habit
Yeah.
slightly. So moving things around. And like in our houses, things go where they go. And when they're not where they
Yeah.
are, we freak out and they go,
Yeah.
what the hell is the whatever it is we're looking for? Maybe it's a good idea to put everything in a slightly different place all the time. We are such creatures of habit. In my
That's
yoga
right.
class, I'll say, you're constantly will twist to your dominant hand side, if
Yeah.
you're reaching for something. So your body gets used to going in the same way. We give
Yeah.
ourselves these grooves that down which we go. So challenging
Yeah.
those grooves, for me, obviously yoga is the biggest thing to challenge your brain because you are so on purpose, you are so present.
Yes.
You can't help but be it. And then the big task of yoga is to do it without judgment because you're looking
Abs.
at Bendy Wendy in the front there who's going, oh, look at me. And so
Yeah.
that's the tough bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that because we
Yeah.
know how to be in the present, we hope. We know how to be on purpose, but the judgment thing is tough.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
do
it is.
we fix that?
I love that you gave that example of Bendy Wendy, because a lot of the athletes I work with are always comparing to Bendy Wendy. And that's why I always I have yoga mats in my office and meditation cushions. So I will say, if I had a choice, the best exercise for the brain is meditation. So it's not for everybody, and I understand that. And so,
It is. It's
um,
for everybody listening to this podcast, that's for sure.
yeah, well, that's good because the way I deconstruct that to say it's not for everybody is because I'm trying not to push back the person who's a little ambivalent, because I will say meditation works for everybody just when they're ready for it to be in their life.
There are so many different types of meditation, though.
That too.
A walking meditation,
That's right.
a mantra meditation, a
Yeah.
guided meditation, like I do. You don't have to just sit still and empty your mind. That's what freaks people out. But anyway, sorry, I've digressed you. Go on.
No, you have not. It's perfect. I mean, that's in Zen, we call it kinhin, which is the walking meditation. So you take the break. I mean, you can't just sit still, physically. I mean, I always say I'm more sore after a meditation retreat than after running like a 5K or a marathon
Mhm.
because the posture and the discipline of sitting and that's the intention.
Yeah.
That's the intention. So the non-judgment is key. And so even in yoga, I think it's really critical. And so oftentimes yoga, especially with the population I work with, is very accessible.
Mm.
I say that with a little grain of salt because it's not that accessible still, because it still feels slow and boring to many people that I work with because they're used to like pumping weight and doing all crazy exercise. And I remind them that yoga was, and this is more your expertise, but built on to warm the mind up to meditate. That was the original practice in India, like was just to how do you get your body loose and ready to sit?
Yeah.
And
You need to be, as you've just said, you need to be strong. If you actually want to
yes,
sit in meditation like a proper yogi for like an hour or two, whatever,
it's
the physical endurance to sit still for 2 hours is way difficult, more
way
difficult
difficult.
than running a
Yeah.
5K, I suggest.
For sure. I mean, that's been my experience at least. So I
Yeah.
think that's right. Yeah. So yeah, there's all of that, and I do think that the other thing I'll say before we move on is much other exercise is like a gerbil on a wheel, kind of spinning, and you're just going through the motions. Whereas yoga, you're forced to be on that mat by yourself, and there, oftentimes without headphones in your ears or things of that nature, so you can't distract, and you have to actually look at Bendy Wendy, and there
Mm.
will be that thought, and you have to work with your thought that reminds you that you're not as flexible as Bendy Wendy. and
Mm.
as much as you try and get to that place of non-judgment, you're still going to judge.
Yeah.
And so we work on the way I say it, we work on decreasing judgment and lowering the volume.
Mm. Okay. So in a yoga class, we can be judgmental in our lives, when we're on social media, things we've been talking about already. It's full of judgment. So,
Yes.
other than saying, well, just let's not be as judgy as we could be, what are the actual sort of like are there like solid techniques that people can put in their pocket and go, ah, now that I can use that to not be judgmental? Or is it just having that awareness of not wanting to be judgmental?
Well, I mean, so language is really powerful. And so if I come back to the opening of this, where we talked about CBT and mindfulness. So in one of these third wave CBTs, it's called RFT, relational frame theory. And
Mhm.
relational frame theory is based on sort of neurological and behavioral and cognitive science, which says that words are powerful. So if
Mm,
I'm trying not to do something, as we just posed that question, like I'm trying not to judge,
yeah.
um, we're doing it then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and our whole entire body from our brain to our feet feel it. And
Yeah.
that's RFT. It reminds us that all of these words are linked with some kind of memory and some neurological pathway. And they are activated when, we're impacted or by them. So um that's the first place I start is we're not trying, we're working towards a neutral judgment position, an observation, a
Mhm.
radical acceptance. So how do I observe what is, okay, Bendy Wendy is really touching her toes. I'm at my knee, I'm touching my knee. That's non-judgmental, right? It's an observation of the experience versus like, I suck, Bendy Wendy's so much better than me.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, this wonderful kind of, it takes it back to, for me, to the sort of the Buddhist teachings of and I've done a meditation on this a little while ago, holding it lightly. So
Yes.
you do not hold an opinion,
Yes.
and trying not to hold an opinion, or just holding it lightly. So not having, I was talking to my yoga teacher about this,
Hmm.
um, and I was, he's a vegan, and I'm not a vegan.
Hmm.
And so I was saying, so what are your reasons? And he goes, I don't really, I don't need to justify it, because that's just what I am. It's just who
That's
I,
right. That's
and I
right.
don't need to, and I don't mind what you eat. You can go and eat all the cow and pigs that you want to, if you want, if
Yeah.
that's what you're into, and I will hold no judgment about that.
That's right.
And um, that holding it lightly, that sort of just allowing it to be,
Yeah.
allows an openness, allows a sort of a freedom to just be the observer. And that
Yeah.
is, yeah, I think that is the key, isn't it? Is just to be an observer. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting point. Um, so when you, in your work, you work with sports psychologists, as a sports psychologist rather. So you're working with athletes,
Hmm.
which is that a very particular type of psychology that you need to instill? Because sports people and athletes have a very singular focus
Hmm.
on, and it's also by its very nature as competitive
Yeah.
focus. They have
Yeah.
to be the best. They have to be the fastest or jump the highest or whatever it is they do.
Yeah.
Which, in a world where I come from, where it's just like hold it lightly, no judgment, da da da,
Yeah.
it's quite contrary to the kind of feelings that we're talking about, this kind of just sort
Yeah.
of Buddhist-esque philosophy
Yeah.
of finding peacefulness and finding balance, being present, being purposeful, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. So I'm fascinated by how you approach that with sports people and athletes.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like every first session I have with them is exactly what you're, describing. So yeah, you can't get to where you want to go until you accept where you are, and that's usually what they can understand. So if I want a gold medal, I can't accept. I have to first start with accepting that I don't have a gold medal, or that there's three people ahead of me that are faster than me this year. You know, I have to accept that. It doesn't mean um, I'm going to win or not win. It just means I have to work on that radical acceptance. So it is, and we frame it within the Yerkes Dotson's performance curve, and this is just an upside down U. And if I have too much stress, I underperform. And if I'm too lackadaisical and holding it lightly, as you said, I'll also underperform. So these two things can exist together, but we have to find that perfect sweet spot.
Mm,
And so to me, that's the art of what I do is I help these high performers find that sweet spot. And ultimately, that's what creates the best performance is somebody that can find that middle path, as we would, another sort of Zen teaching. A lot of Zen teachings in the third wave CBT. And so middle path is, finding this balance between, like I say, nothing's black and white. And ultimately, there's so much peace in the gray, but we
mm,
have to get to that.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So, um, I want to kind of veer back towards the mindfulness side of things because I feel like,
sure.
and I know that you've written a workbook. I can see it behind you. It looks very
Yeah.
pretty. Mindfulness workbook for beginners, which is great.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what kind of mindfulness exercises you think that everybody can do on a kind of daily basis, like so super simple, just like, oh yeah, I remember that. I heard that on a podcast. I'm going to try that tomorrow or
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Present moment, sorry.
Present moment.
Um,
Yeah,
what tips and tricks have you got that could start people off on their mindfulness journey? Because I think it's a really powerful and great practice. You know, meditation works for some people, mindfulness for others. There's a very happy overlap in the middle of that Venn diagram, I'm absolutely sure. So
for sure.
yeah, tell me some juicy mindfulness tricks.
I would love to. And I love overlap. I think it's, like you said, it really just depends on the person. And so it's really individualized. The workbook, the reason I got excited about the project and took it on was because, like you said, it's the workbook for beginners. And many other mindfulness books that are out there are specific to some illness or some challenge or issue or diagnosis. It's
Mm,
mindfulness for anxiety or mindfulness for eating disorders. And so this one was um, allegedly the first, to market of just a global kind of for beginners. If I am considering how to do mindfulness, no matter what I am, whether I am a caretaker, a homemaker, a CEO, this could be the book that, gives you a little bit of a foundation. And so the how to is sort of in there in terms of like, the other thing I like to say is like, you don't need a membership.
mm,
Many of these many other sort of wellness initiatives require a financial commitment, and it's important. Our health is important. And so whether it's, you know, and I believe in it all, that's why many of our high performers, like if we're watching Wimbledon for your UK listeners at some point, right? There's these top performers are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on their wellness, because their body is what brings them their performance. And this includes Reiki and acupuncture and acupressure and all the sort of things that we've, kind of borrowed from the East. And so, how do you do it? You just start somewhere. It might just be a meal that you do with your family with 5 minutes of silence, or the meal prep of just doing again together, where you say you're just peeling the potatoes. Oftentimes when we're peeling the potatoes, we're thinking about an argument we had with a supervisor. We're worried if our partner's going to like these potatoes, or we were annoyed that the cashier took so long when we were checking out with the potatoes. Everything's sort of connected in that way. So
mm,
you just have to start in these small little ways. It might be yoga, just starting a yoga practice. I remember I had one client who like, she said, I'll go, but I'm not going to say Om at the end of class. If they want me to say it, I'm not going to say it. I was like, cool, don't then. You can actually pretend like you're saying it or not. And those are the sort of ways that you have to do it, is just find what works for you.
mm,
But it's not a one size fits all. So it's hard for me to say, like, this is the thing to do tomorrow or right now. Um,
mm.
if you want that thing, just take one deep belly breath in this moment. because that might be the practice, right? The diaphragmatic breathing just activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And no matter how anxious or annoyed you are, or whatever you're doing in that moment, Pema Chodron wrote that it just takes 6 of those breaths to change your mood.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
that's all we need.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can back that one. I'm fully on board with breath. Just take a
Yeah,
few deep breaths.
yeah,
It's an extraordinarily powerful thing to do, to just
yeah,
access the breath. And reminding yourself to take the breath
yeah.
is the main factor here. Um, and I don't know, some people have, I don't know, I wear various pieces of jewelry that remind me to breathe sometimes. I mean,
Perfect.
someone just has to say the word breathe, and I'm like, oh, yes, I can take a big
Yeah,
breath. I can't help but, it's sort of, and now I don't need to think about it. I just know that that's what I need to do. Last thing at night as I'm going to sleep, I will take a really big, deep breath and let it all go. And then the next thing I know, I'm asleep. It's literally just one breath and I'm gone.
oh, for
And
sure.
it's just the most incredible and powerful thing to do. So yeah, I think that's a great top tip. Thank you for that.
Yes. Yeah.
We can all get behind that. Um, I wrote down a while back in our conversation, I wrote down two lovely, not very lovely words. And I'm trying to think what that was regarding. So I think we were talking about CBT and we were talking about neuroplasticity and we were talking about how to shift the way that our minds work. And just
Yeah.
before we finish, I want to just go back to this because I think it's a really big topic that I think will help people understand themselves and other people in their lives as well.
Yeah.
So, when people are operating, and the words I've written down are shame and guilt,
Yeah.
it's insidious and horrible of things. They're the lowest vibration of emotions that we can have. They take us into a horrible place.
Yeah.
How do you use CBT or mindfulness to bring yourself out of that kind of depth of negative thought? Is that possible?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's very possible. So there's, I mean, several authors that come to mind for me on this. Of course, the most famous is Brene Brown,
Mm,
doing research around vulnerability, and then she like built into, shame and guilt. I mean, these
yeah.
are high level emotions that are disgusting, like you said. But what I will say, and then you've got people like Marsha Linehan, Shireen Rizvi, people that are studying dialectical behavioral therapy, which Marsha talks that this is a form of CBT, and she basically learned it through her Zen practice. She herself is a sort of she's disclosed about her own kind of mental health challenges and her own suicidality, and that Zen was the only thing that saved her. And so shame and guilt was a big part of that. Many people with these sort of deep rooted challenges will kind of connect with that. The human experience is full of that. The thing I wrote down as we were having this conversation was a quote that I always mess up, but it's basically that what the West calls suffering is what the East calls living, type
Mm,
thing. Like the East just accepts that the pain that you experience is just part of life,
yeah.
whereas the West is like, how do I get rid of this? And this is suffering.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's a strange, it's an interesting thing that we have been programmed to think that we don't deserve or need to suffer when it is
Yes.
an absolute integral part of being a human person, being alive is, you know,
Yeah,
we operate in waves.
that's
We
right.
have good days, we have bad days, we have
Yes,
highs and we have lows, and wherever we are, we know, and that brings me back to this holding it lightly,
that's
because
right.
if you're constantly striving for that high, that
Hmm.
peaceful, sitting on top of a mountain vibe, you can't sit on top of a mountain all the time. You have to come
No,
down to the valley to get water.
that's
You
right.
have to, it's anyway, yeah. Okay, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Honestly, I could talk about all of that for a while. It's a big old subject, but you're right. I think
yeah,
acceptance is um is a clear path to making it less heavy.
yeah,
If we can accept it, that doesn't mean that we get, oh, I'm just going to be like this forever. It's just that, oh, this is how I am right now. And that's where
yeah.
I guess this present moment on purpose and without judgment really comes in. So,
Yes.
Dr. Pete, thank you. Tell me, how can people, I'll tell everybody, how can they get hold of you and tell people what you offer as well in the way of your work and so on?
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor and a director of a lot of behavioral health and sports psychology programs. You can find me at Instagram, or most of my handles are official Dr. Pete, Dr. Pete. And so, yeah, I'd love to, the goal is to, as you said, spread joy and cultivate happiness. And, I can do that one-on-one, but I can do it a little more impactfully uh, in stages like this. So, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this really important topic. And, you know, I like this because my job is to not have a job. And I think that the work that you're doing and these types of resources can really facilitate that because suffering's natural. So what we also, we say that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So we are going to have pain like the highs and lows, but the suffering piece is optional.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, that's beautiful thing. Beautiful to finish on that. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.